I'm very glad to be here and in such illustrious company. And before we start, I just wanted to gauge how many architects are here. I think there's two. It's just quite interesting because with Architecture Club, the people who come and speak in Frome are surprised at how many people are interested in architecture who have nothing to do with it in their professional life, but I think it is a subject that sort of touches us all. We have a very interesting panel here, and I think it's also a very interesting time in the profession of architecture and the field of art, because we have some interesting things going on nationally and internationally. I don't know if you realise, but in the last week, the Architectural Collaborative Assemble have been nominated for the Turner Prize, which is very interesting. And also Grayson Perry's collaboration with Fat Architecture on a house for Essex has just been completed. And that is really an amazing crossover of art and architecture. So to our panel. First of all, to my left, Abe Rogers is a London-based designer with a very famous family heritage. I know all about that kind of thing. His clients have included Condé Nast, Comme des Garçons, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Until recently, he was the head of new interior design program at the Royal College of Art. He's designed many exhibitions for the Tate Modern, Barbican, Science Museum and the V&A in London, as well as multiple museums and galleries abroad, and completed a host of residential and hospitality projects. I picked up a quote that Abe said, which resonates with me, and he said, "We were so marinated in architecture and design by both sets of parents that I naturally wanted to rebel." So Abe has kind of gone off in a different direction, but been drawn back to architecture, which I find very interesting. Things that struck me when I was researching Abe were every time I saw a photograph of him, it was a riot of colour. You're looking rather subdued today. But I just find that fascinating because often in architecture and architects, there's a kind of tendency towards beige, and you definitely buck that trend. And also Abe is dyslexic, and that took him down a certain path and as a maker, and I think that really informs your work as well as a designer, which is very interesting. To my right...
also dyslexic?
Also dyslexic, yeah, and that's another interesting thing.
Let's compete.
Who can spell the worst? No, there's a very high proportion of architects and tennis players who are dyslexic, and there is the theory that you have a more developed right side of the brain, which means you're better at spatial awareness, I believe. Anyway, I digress. I first met Luis a year ago, just before the opening of Hauser and Wirth at Bruton, and I kind of did some research then on you, and I thought, oh, he looks very cool, I'm not sure about him. But then he took me around. I've never met a more enthusiastic person, and it was great fun having a tour of the buildings. To give you his bio, Luis is an Argentinian architect and founder of Laplace & Co., an architecture and design studio based in Paris. Born and educated in Buenos Aires, he graduated from Universidad de Belgrano with a bachelor and master's degree in architecture and urbanism in 1995. After working in Argentina, Luis moved to New York from 1999 to 2004. He worked for Seldorf Architects, an architectural practice well known for its devotion to modern design and in particular art-related projects. In 2004, Luis Laplace founded in Paris with his partner Christophe Comoy his own firm, and his work frequently engages with the art world, and I can't think of a better example than coming here and seeing how Luis has worked with in two different ways, I think. First of all, in a kind of restrained manner with the buildings, the existing buildings and the new buildings. But then if you ever get a chance to see it, the interior of the farmhouse is spectacular, and that's where you really let rip, you know, all the restraint is gone. It's fantastic. And again, the colour comes through. So you do see the kind of very neutral backdrop for the artwork in the gallery, but the farmhouse is much richer, I think. And finally, I'm not even going to try and pronounce your full name, Godda. I'm going to leave that to you. Do you want to say your full name in Icelandic?
Guðmundur Oddur Magnússon.
You can see why I didn't try. Godda is an Icelandic artist and professor at the Iceland Academy of Arts in the Department of Architecture and Design. He's a specialist in the use and reading of visual languages. He studied art in Reykjavik and graphic design in Vancouver, Canada. He was taught by artists such as Dieter Roth, Herman Nisch, and Robert Filio. It's already going over into the art world, which I'm less familiar with. Previous projects have included the Lincoln Bank project and also working with artists Paul McCarthy and Jason Rhodes at the Pompidou in 2004 in an exhibition called Dionysiac. He's an avid spokesman of visual literacy and has written many articles on the subject for the Icelandic media. And when I was digging around to find out more about Godda, I could see that you're very interested in music, and that informs your work. He was also involved with the Fluxus movement, which includes Dieter Roth and Joseph Beuys?
No, Herman Nisch.
Oh, Herman Nisch.
Yeah.
And also there was a kind of dark time in Godda's life, and in order to get out of this, he studied graphic design in order to do something sort of straight and useful. But then I think you've kind of broken free of those shackles, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I think that would be a very interesting thing to discuss. So one of the starting points I thought we could investigate is when we talk about the profession of architecture or the role of the artist, often these were defined or really nailed down in the 19th century. And I want to start with you, Lewis. Do you think that we have a very tired idea of what an architect should be?
What do you mean by tired idea?
Do you think it's just old-fashioned? I mean, everything has changed, and yet...
I think that these days, I think that there is a famous tango, it's called Cambalache, that it talks about like the 21st century, that things, they're all mixed. And I think that today, I think that we are a lot more open-minded, and I think that architecture has gone abroad, and same with art, and I think that things crossed, and I think that an artist can do architecture, can do furniture, and same as an architect. And I think that the boundaries are less rigid and more loose. And I think it's very interesting because the collaborations happen. Like you said before, like these artists collaborating with architects and architects collaborating with artists, and that's what happened here. I think that I think this job, it's not a job it's not done by me. I think it's made by me, artist, the clients, the Manuel and Ivan, they participated a lot, and then they have their hands on it very strongly. And I think that I'm interested on that, on collaborations and on merging, minds, putting together different things. And I think that things are a lot more interesting than if they come from one source only.
Yeah. Abe, you mentioned earlier to me that you sometimes find your work with architects is almost like a corrupting influence. Can you delve into that?
We find ourselves more and more brought into projects to I suppose, contaminate and corrupt through collaboration larger projects than we would naturally deal with. I think there's such an incredible confidence in architects that often that confidence leads to things being designed in very opaque, solid fashions without the potential for other layers of mystery, which is, I think, why you're so interested in collaborating with artists. I mean, there's the famous Norman Foster quote when he says, "Art in architecture is like putting lipstick on a gorilla," and for me, it's quite the reverse, and it's trying to subvert the grid at times, which so exists also in graphic design to an extent. I suppose we see architects doing furniture and doing cutlery and doing everything. We don't tend to see industrial designers as such doing buildings, and it's an interesting problem, I suppose, in a way, is this, how we break the smug and confidence of many architects. I think your approach is very different. It's an approach of an artist in many ways. And when you talk about the collaborations with the farmhouse, and which is a collaboration with the building, which is such a sympathetic attitude, I find it fascinating.
I think we're living in a sort of like hinge period. We're like experimenting. Oftentimes I don't know where we're going. So like with the farmhouse you mentioned, I think that nobody knew in which direction we were going. We're trying something that we didn't do before.
Maybe the house knew where it was going, but the house was in control.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
The house has some wonderful kind of 70s and 60s wallpaper that was just left, and then you used that as a starting point, didn't you? But Godard also has collaborated with Lewis on this building with the Roth Bar, which is a kind of very extravagant and Baroque piece in the more restrained part. How did that work with the two of you working together?
Well, we didn't exactly work together, no, not at all. But we talked a lot during this period of 1 year ago. And I was actually more or less also doing a documentary of the making of the Roth Bar and Grill. And when I was interviewing him and had been observing the way he worked, and was quite fascinated by his prestige way of doing things and his total attention for details, and how sophisticated he was in working, and I was sort of curious about his feelings about this Roth Bar, like a cancer, almost the opposite to the everything which is in the environment. And he didn't. I was asking him, "What do you think about this cancer in your prestige design?" And he didn't answer directly, but he did a punchline. He said something. You mentioned that the bar is like a cancer in my architectural solution in rebuilding this place. But cancer is not necessarily always evil. There is a good nature type of cancer. And he said, the Roth Bar is like a cancer of good nature in my
I think it's very interesting that you're all from different countries, because often we think of things as being very global and international, but actually there are different approaches that come from different countries. And I'm maybe thinking in particular of Godard, because Iceland is such a very interesting country, absolutely tiny, only 300,000 people. And Godard told me over lunch that everyone in the art world in Iceland knows each other, pretty much. And so I wonder if that leads to more collaborative working.
It has more. I don't believe so much in nationalistic. I think the world has quite expanded into one way, into one world. And what is important in my case is that I think it is the French philosopher Bourdieu who has this concept habitus. You can't help it, you are born into certain time and certain period of time. And I come from a very small community north of Iceland, just of 10,000 people, to Reykjavik, which was maybe within 100,000 people at that time. And at this time, it's strange to come from such a small place and land into a world of a guy who was married to an Icelandic woman in the late 50s and had the name Dieter Roth, which had very international connections at that time. And he's bringing his friends to our small school, Icelandic College of Art and Craft, and not wanting to teach us, but just to work with us. And exercise his Icelandic, and he liked that. And also exercise telling the truth. There is so much lie in the world, we have to exercise telling the truth. And he gave the class full house of marks in the beginning, but when he found out that we didn't tell exactly the truth, the marks lowered from 10 to 9, and then lower and lower, but you know, the whole class didn't make it, you know, in the end. So, it's difficult because also it's sort of almost the background history of the bar is that he said, I don't want to teach, could I change this classroom into a bar? And I will bring the booze. And is it okay to show up in school at noon so we can sleep in? And then I was drunk for 1 month with him. and we had to show up in school to be drunk with Dieter Roth and his friends, exercising, telling the truth.
And collaborating. This is collaborating, surely. This is collaborating,
yes.
Surely.
And also, these people, they are sort of the pioneers of breaking the barriers between disciplines. Why, you know, it doesn't matter what way what methods you use to express yourself, if you are expressing yourself. You don't have to paint, you don't have to use expensive material. They were the ones to start to use the dirt and leftover materials, and also they even, you know, Dieter Roth, which you sometimes forget that he's trained as a graphic designer in a very strict structuralistic way of the 50s. And he was describing to us why he had to abandon this rigid Swiss structuralism he sort of brought up in, and saying that, you know, he's born 1930, he's 20 years old 1950, and during this post-war period, he said, you know, we were just looking at European cities like big wounds, and we blamed emotions, nationalism, and the worships of heroes, or you know, dictators, and we had to, you know, abandon everything which has to do with feelings and nationality, and then they sort of woke up the international thinking from the Bauhaus period, and then in architecture, in graphic design, you know, everything started to come out of Switzerland and influence the whole world, until he said during the late 70s this became a style without content. It was just a style, superficial style. And then he started to just handwrite things and use the dirt, and he went his way and stopped being a graphic designer and became a world famous artist. Please.
Okay, sorry. I just wondered, you've all kind of started out with professions that you've then broken free of to a certain extent. But do you think I think that to me sounds like a good starting point rather than almost the blank canvas of being an artist, you know. Do you feel that it's almost good to have those restrictions that you then can push against?
I think it's good to have lots of experiences and influences, and to find situations that you can learn from and be inspired by, certainly. And I spent 10 years as a carpenter, and that definitely influences my work in the way I work and the way I respond to materials. But probably for 8 years I wouldn't touch wood because I'd seen so much of it. Now we're becoming slightly better friends. But yeah, I think everything makes you what you are, isn't it? As a designer, as an artist, and you have your tools, and you find more tools at times and less tools. I've just been in Sweden carving ice for a week, which was extraordinary, because you're in this kind of magic land where this material, which you can carve in any direction, it has no grain, you can see where you're carving, but it can only exist in this one magic place. As soon as you take it somewhere else, it turns into water and melts. But for a while it's in Sweden, it exists as this incredibly fine and extraordinary material, which I found incredibly exciting.
That does, but you almost appreciate it more because you knew the limitations
of timber. It's in a magic moment. This material is relevant, and only relevant then, or in a freezer.
And Lewis, your work here very imaginative and exciting. Do you find having the limits almost placed on you, being able to push against them, are helpful?
Well, one always has limits. I've been brought in Argentina, as you can imagine. I had my natural limits, and I was always trying new things. And I went to school, and I always felt that my best presentations at schools were when they have no resources, when you have to be creative. And we were talking with Gode before about education, and I think that the problem, in my case that I had, is that when I have too much structure, it's a problem for me.
Okay.
And I think that I like to have guidances, but I think that for creativism you need to be free from lots of things. You need to be more experimental, be open, and to
Free to imagine.
yeah, and basically try new things that you don't expect. And that's why I think that I like to work today with artists, because they make me think in a very non-academic way for architects. And it's like always I found that the answers are somewhere else, but in my academicism, which is interesting. I'm not saying that architecture is wrong, but I'm saying that it's complementary to my mind. It's and oftentimes I find solutions with thinking in a different way.
Well, it's obviously you have a very sort of stimulating relationship with the people you collaborate with, which is really interesting. But this also does rely on having very good clients, because many architects are working in a much more restrictive environment.
Yes and no, but because only with Godot here, I met him in Venice, and we have a conversation, and it's in 2 hours. I've had the feeling that I have the best lecture I have in many years. So it was for free. It has nothing to do with anyone else.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like I think that you can find your own way to do things, and oftentimes in the high end, the clients don't want the farmhouse or the crazy things. I think that this is new. That the collaborations is a new. I think it's an old thing, but it's a new thing. I think at the same time. I think that not everyone is open to have artists collaborate into the architecture, and for me that's a bit of the future. But it's people are more open and going to be open about it, but most of the people are not there yet.
Yeah.
That's partly because architects are so used to collaboration being top down, where it's the engineer is collaborating beneath them, and beneath that is the service engineer and the contractor. They're used to this very triangular structure, and that's not the case when collaborating with an amazing building or
Exactly,
Also, I think in previous times, the artist was almost like the decorator. They would just come and stick something on the completed.
We can't help it that the design and architects is part of a service industry. I really like, and I get my attention so much on people who do commissions, the producers behind things, and I like the aspect of a client or the commissioner more and more, because I start to see a pattern how this works. There is a big difference between designers or architects or artists even. This difference between serving and pleasing. When you start to please the client or start to go by, his wife's or husband's ideas even, if it should be blue or yellow or whatever, and you please the client, you are in a shithole. And you have to have the self-respect and how...
You need dialogue.
I know, Jesus Christ. Because you see, the only designers, architects I really dislike are the ones who are just, so-called problem solvers, and because if you don't infuse spirit with into matter, or you would take the spirit out of the matter, and I can't understand good creative work without putting your spirit, your emotions, your heart into it. I can't understand. Then it becomes a mere technical exercise or pleasing industry, not service industry in the industry.
Which is unfortunately it's a bit of a problem of today, because we are so mediatic that we're becoming almost systematic. And it's very difficult to break all the time these rules that he's talking about, just to be all the time being innovative and bring something new and to challenge, because this challenge is not anymore a challenge. You know, the next one is not going to be a challenge because we've seen it, we experienced it. So it's like, if this happens again, it's not interesting.
No.
But what can be, I think, in galleries particularly, it can be the absence of architecture. I think the Robin Irwin hanging or curation of the Dear Beacon, which creates totally an architectural outcome through absolute absence of architecture. I mean, it's such a structured exhibition of objects, and the dialogue between the artworks and the architecture, for me, is absolutely magnificent. But, you know, in the same way that when Robin Irwin entered into the Whitney with those threads last year, it was a recreation of a 1970 installation, but it completely transformed the architecture with such a minimal amount of effort and absolutely no concrete. I mean, intellectual effort totally, but it's this magic of changing things. And I think traditionally, in the world of design, we too much believe in concrete, which is why I'm so excited at the moment by ice and by strings and by these much more ephemeral materials which disappear, which don't have to be smashed down and dragged around. And I think that, you know, this ephemeral nature comes much more powerful through a sense of collaboration and working with others to find a new way forward.
I think also, like, you know, maybe what you're talking about is also doing architecture for art. You know, it's more, you put it yourself in service too, you know, and it's like, and then the collaboration is more like you're giving a space, a neutral space for artists to work afterwards. But I think that right now, in my experience, more like having, you know, architecture merge into art and collaborate, and it happens in my case more into the residential part, because I think that if you're doing an art space, you have to take yourself away and do something that it works for different type of artists. So it's something completely different. So I think that in my mind there's less collaboration there, and more you're doing something for someone else to work afterwards, and well, that's fine, that's interesting, but also, like, I'm more interested in, like, the real collaboration on something that's transformed into a space that's you're going to be living in.
I just want to pick up on something that God has said about serving as opposed to pleasing. And I do think, well, you've mentioned, you know, how you serve your clients, but there's a very interesting dynamic where you have a very charismatic client and maybe an inexperienced architect, where the client can demand more and more and more, and the building becomes, it has no spirit, because the architect has never said no. And I've seen this happen again and again. So obviously you need a good relationship, you know, neither one may be dominating. What do you feel about that? Good.
Yeah, it has to do with understanding. And you know, there's so many examples in history of art about this collaboration, and it is so neglected, the other side of art history, the one who make it happen, from the Medici people in Venice during the Renaissance, how they financed, when sort of well, we have to have one thing in mind, and that is that all major ideas in art and history of ideas, they are sort of a kind of a cosmopolitan thing, at least in Western European culture. Like when we start to categorize Renaissance architecture, or neoclassical architecture, or modernism, or postmodernism, whatever it's called, you see that it has to do with some kind of a spirit who is going on, and the one who, when the big changes happens, it is sometimes happens in the same thing happens in different places. Something happens like the Gothic or the Renaissance or whatever, both in Florence and Venice, and then it is just not just the architect, it's the painters, the sculpturists, and everyone, even designing forks or teaspoons, they have Renaissance mark. So it's the application of ideas, and then you need people who understand, and you know, early enough, those who are people who make history by this this synergy.
But it becomes a form of contamination. It's the cancer you were talking
Yes,
about
yes,
before,
yes,
in a way.
yes, yes.
Can
And the magic
ideas
happens.
spread and
Yeah,
build.
Yeah. The magic happens, yes.
And we go back to
and then it becomes boring and cliches in whatever.
And it changes. Something else changes.
Yeah.
Someone else comes up with another idea. And the speed that things change now through this peculiar web and
It's
connection.
not easy to find people who understand, like he says. Like I think that to have someone who understands from the beginning, it's magic, because it's oftentimes people they don't know, like and even when they're building something they don't know what they want or where they're going. So very few times happens in the beginning that there's a connection, and once that connection happens, it's incredible.
And also one important thing is that I don't do this, make these differences between disciplines and not even scientists, because when you go up to a certain level, you see the same characteristics of good scientists, good artists, good architects. They are the same. They all are free of disciplines.
Limitations.
Yes, indications. They flow, and they know how to edit the best things out of the flowing. That being creative is to let it go and have the flow, but being a true artist is the one who knows how to edit.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly true and from move.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think that's when you see things that haven't worked, it is often that not enough has been left out.
Yeah.
So it really is
and know the
a
timing
refining.
before you overdo it, because
Yeah.
people have tendency to overwork things.
That also comes back perfect moment. The Schroeder House, this is an incredible collaboration with an amazing client, an amazing architect at an amazing moment in time. And you create this total
we sometimes
singular thing.
Use the metaphor for this like the Beatles. Ringo was on the bottom doing the rhythm, never considered intellectual. When they were really famous, John said the only way to get us down to earth was to look back at Ringo. Then we knew we were just ordinary people. Yeah. And then John, the intellect, the analytical, the social, conscious personality, and knew how to edit, knew how to analyze and edit, and had consciousness. And then Paul, the romantic, he was so sweet, doing all the ballads and melodies. And then George playing sitar in Tibet, they're together. They're a fantastic band.
Yeah.
But the solo albums were after Yoko killed Beatles. Yeah. It was not good anymore.
Yeah, you're not bitter about that.
Well, I'm not bitter.
That's interesting you mentioned music, because I'd really like to hear more about how that influences your work.
Well, the thing again is that people like this Fluxus people, they were never disciplined in one field. They didn't look at it that way. They had a basic idea behind it. It was not a coincidence if they called it Fluxus. But when we did this Dieter Roth album, because Dieter had a basically simple idea to reverse things. And he told the class, don't play together, play apart. And he invited us to a collection of instruments, and had Björn, his son, putting on the recording button, and then just 2 times 20 minutes for the vinyl, and that's it. But when we did Nietzsche had this fetish about Iceland and this mystical north, and it was part of this idea of Germans, 19th century Germans, about Nordlicht, and even saw himself as a continuing doing the work of Wagner, Bruckner, these huge big composers of the late 19th century, and he started to do a very constructive way, doing a symphony in 10 movements called Iceland. And one was Vatnajökull, the biggest glacier, and one was Aurora Borealis, and doing this in a very German expressive way, but with the amateurs, with the vernacular amateurs and students who didn't know how to play, but the music was atonal. It didn't need to have lines. He just formed a system for the string section with a flat hand, for the brass section with a fist, and then he conducted us, and it was quite a performance seeing him being the conductor with this, and we were all drunk on stage and traveled through us. That was part of showing the Europeans and Dieter and Nietzsche. They were showing this crude, wild, this type of Icelanders who are brought up without being disciplined, because we were free, playing at the beach, and we could leave children in their what is it called, the
pushchair.
Yeah, pushchair, without attention, nobody bothered, and this is this free atmosphere of coming from a small communities where everyone knew each other and no really threats.
Well, I think you've touched on that thing I was mentioning earlier, that I think Iceland is a very particular place. I mean...
Well, there may be a couple of things about it, and the one is that the Icelanders, they have been islanders, and always sort of amazed to this big world, and they are storytellers, have always been. And they have vibrant imagination. We believe in elves. Majority of the nature of the population believes in elves, but believes in elves. The thing is that I know it. You know about Björk, you know about Sigurrós, and you see how they are inspired by this elves image. How Sigurrós was presented visual in the beginning with hats like dwarves and elves, and the videos of Björk are full of this imagery, of this narration of Icelandic legends in a way. And these were discovered in late 19th century, and they were translated into English during this time, and that made people like William Morris to be enthusiastic about Iceland and the spirit of the root of German culture, actually, in Nordic mythology. Sorry.
Lewis, can you tell me a bit about your background growing up in Argentina? What was the kind of cultural scene and
Well, when I was very young, I liked a lot of things, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and I didn't want to be a doctor. Then I started a little bit, screenplay.
Yeah, screenwriting. Yeah.
No, but for when you do the interiors in the theatre.
Oh,
set design.
Scenography. Yeah.
So I did set design in the Colón Theatre in Buenos Aires. I did lighting there. I did a little bit of art and ceramics, and then it was a time just to decide what I wanted to do, and I said, okay, I'm going to go to graphic design. And at that time, my father said, no, that's not a profession. You cannot do this. So then I have to choose something else, and then he forced me to do like a more, he's a lawyer, and a more structured career, and in between the options it was architecture. And actually then, that happened.
Yeah. And was it quite a kind of restrictive, conventional society that you grew up in?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, it was the 80s, when democracy came. It was like in Spain, like La Movida, and people got crazy, and I was brought up in that rather environment. It wasn't only the dictatorship was a kid, but then in the 80s it was, university was very free, and lots of crazy things happened, and I think it was a good creative environment, I think.
And Abe, what about your family background? You tried to rebel against the prevailing architecture and design, but what was your
taste? Too much
good taste.
Too much taste and too much Alva Alto, who we now love, of course, but continuous. I became I left school with 2 O-levels, and travelled around the world, making quite a lot of pot and trying to make furniture as I went. But then kind of stumbled back into design somewhat accidentally, making people's kitchens, and they needed to be designed to an extent. And doing exhibitions and stuff like that. So, it was sort of reverse education. I realised I had all this inherent knowledge, which had kind of been more through osmosis, I suppose, than through being conscious of. and yeah, and much more enjoying designing than making in a way. But I kind of like the influence of the two. And you know, a lot of our work is now about collaborating, and that's, you know, it's kind of grown out of that. And I think partly for being dyslexic, I have to collaborate because there's so many things I can't do, but then there's things I can do quite well, I think. And so you're reliant upon a team to work together, and your job becomes to keep them active and inspired and keep their eyes open. I teach a lot, so it's, you know, I think a lot of collaboration about, and problem with lots of very static architecture is about lack of awareness of what else is going on around it. There's such an extraordinary world at the moment, and you know, seeing the art in the artists working here, you realise everything is possible, from making extraordinary films with Pippi wandering around bushes, you know, and her very low-tech cameras.
Yeah, I think interesting. You very definitely define what you can't do through your dyslexia, and I think that's a great advantage actually, because you recognise it, and I think that many professionals have things they can't do, but they don't realise they can't do them, so they just do them badly.
Yes.
Do you think that you've almost got that chink, and it's allowed you to?
I think it's incredibly helpful being dyslexic. I think there's no, you know, we have many more opportunities for humour as we misread things around the place on a very regular basis. And yeah, you concentrate on what you are good at, which is, you know,
it's true, because you become a lot more intuitive also. You have to.
And also one important thing, because I deal with, you know, at least 25% of students in art schools are dyslexic. The good thing about them is that they are not burdened with quotations. They have to tell and say what they see, and they have sort of like a first generation.
Does that go back to your honesty in a way that you were talking about at the beginning?
Yes,
so it doesn't need. You don't have to have this presentation
Yes.
of pretense or fake knowledge.
Yes, and Borges is Argentinian, and there's the Book of Sands. He said something, some sentence like, "Is that a quotation?" And then the guy said, "Our language is nothing but a system of quotations." And if you see students go through and become educated, and it's full of quotations, but not with first-hand observations. And those who are fitted perfectly to do first-hand observation are the dyslexic one. So it's a gift, not that it's not you are not sick. It can be difficult to be dyslexic in this kind of society, but it is a gift.
No, for me, I mean, I find that very much so.
Yes, it is. I know it is.
Fascinating. I'm sure as time moves on, we'll see it in a different light. Dyslexia. I think it's
Probably if it is in a creative profession, it's good. Maybe if you want to be a
Accountant.
Yeah,
Yes.
accountant. is fine.
Yeah.
I
A
have-
lawyer, forget it.
Well, I have to say, I'm originally an engineer, and I think actually engineering is a kind of home for social misfits, really. I mean, myself accepted, of course, but you really met people who couldn't speak, you know, very shy, inward-looking, and they went into a very analytical profession because they could remain in their comfort zone.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll analyse all professions eventually, and they all have certain
So we see going to
characteristics.
any IT department, there's a leaning towards creative autism. You know,
Yeah.
And one
there's-
important
so
thing.
you go to.
Sorry, go on.
No.
I was just going to say that creativity, artists and architects and designers don't have the copyright of creativity. It is in our all. It is just a matter of how it's suppressed.
Totally. I think that's 100% true.
Yeah.
And also finding that thing,
Yes,
that
exactly. Get
channel.
the backwards, yes, channel to get
Yeah,
it, yes.
yeah. I have to say, you're all very unusual in that, for architects, in that and artists, that you're very good with words, with speaking, because sometimes that's a problem in communicating. If you're very visual, visual people tend to communicate through drawing and.
I can't say I'm not an architect.
No, I know, designer, but
Specific.
Sorry, but you're all very good at talking about what you do.
One important thing is it's so strange because you see also how visual medium is overtaking everything. And you see also what is the most strange thing is to see intellectuals with their PowerPoint show, with sentences they are saying to the audience, reading what you see on the screen. It's unbelievable.
In a very bad font.
Exactly.
Small.
And a terrible
You start
background
to
colour.
think, will it drop down from a bowl? Will it come from the side? Will it explode in the center? Is he using Helvetica or Times? Is the background orange or blue?
No one was ever sacked for using Helvetica,
Yeah.
as they say.
But the thing is that usually, at least I can talk endlessly if I have image behind me.
And for me, it's
Yeah.
quite weird talking about images. I was
That-
saying this at the beginning. But it's a good
Yeah.
discipline. We have to hold our hands.
I know, I never know what to do with my hands. Terrible. No, it is true with in Architecture Club, our architects rely strongly on their images behind them to prompt their words. So this is quite an unusual setting. But do you all teach? I know that you teach, Abe, and
Well, I graduated 25 years ago. I've never been a professional in my field. I've been educated since I came out. So I can't help it. I started as a technical teacher to make the change into computer environment in late 80s, early 90s. And within 2 years, the students got much more, better than I was, and I had to stay back a little bit. And then I started to do studio projects, and I was out in 5-6 years. And because I didn't have the right lingo and not the right currents and trends. And then I had to do theory courses. And then age started to help me. And the birds started to grow. And I got older.
The weight of wisdom
Yeah.
upon your
And
shoulders.
and now, I just have to appear, and everybody is shitly afraid of me when I...
I have to say I was a bit afraid of you when I looked you up on the internet with your very austere beard. And Lewis, do you do teaching?
No, I don't. No.
I think you should. You'd be good. Very good. I wonder if, Alice, I don't know the normal format, but would we take questions? Would the audience like to ask some questions? Go on, be brave. Put your hand up. Lady over there.
I wonder how often do you get clients who push you in what you do, who are sort of more exciting than you, as it were, and push you into areas that you haven't thought of?
Lewis, do you want to start?
I think that when people come to me, they come. So far, I think it's art related, and I haven't been pushed to new areas. I'm trying right now to do other things, and I see what happens. But I think that it's interesting because
But the house project, Lewis, pushed you in a different direction.
Yeah,
You hadn't done this
true.
peeling before.
No, true.
It was
yeah, you're right.
the house is the
Yeah.
clients.
It's a new thing. In that sense, yes. I think that every project is a different challenge because I think that you deal with different problems and different things. But in a way, it was not for me. It was not difficult to do that project. That project there were two projects. The first project was like a very wide, pleasing project
Helvetica.
for everyone. And then the minute that we finished the demolition, we did a walk with Manuela and Ivan, and I said, I think we made a mistake with the project, and they both immediately understood, and they said, yes, let's change it, and they there was not even a convincing. We were all in the same place, and we talked about letting the house take us to a completely different place and do this experimental project, and there was not even a debate. It was a conversation. It lasted like an hour, and that happened.
I think that the relationship with clients is totally an education, and each client, especially working with Strong, we're working with Heston Blumenthal at the moment on one hand, and we're working in your grandfather's tower, the Bolton Tower, on the other hand. And you can't work without these very strong personalities, even though your grandfather's dead. The ghost of him lives in that building,
Sure is.
forever, and you have to communicate with it. And Heston, every time you meet him, has a new series of kind of crazy ideas he wants to then recontaminate your contamination, which sometimes is complicated, but you have to wrestle them through, and it's a continuous education. It's fun, and I think that's why we do it. I mean, it's fun. We have to deliver, and that's quite stressful. People have to be dined at the end, and everyone needs to love it. So, yes, but it's educational and fun at moments.
got
I look at it this way, is that if I get good job, that is what inspires me. The task inspires me, not necessarily the person at the end. But you know, maybe you go into a world you have never been in before because you are getting this new job. And you have to, you know, do some research or whatever, because like we sometimes say, no research, no design. Or no design, no research.
No story.
Yes, exactly.
No narrative.
And you will have to learn, it's part of being a designer or communicator, is to research and go into things, and of course I learn a lot.
And do you ever have to wrestle your clients?
Do I have to?
Wrestle with your clients?
No, I abandoned them before. I don't want that anymore.
No, don't want
I did
that
it maybe
stress.
yes, yeah, but they just can go, I don't mind.
Okay.
And by the nature of our work, we always have clients. With one exception, we run a fellowship and did a project where we asked 24 people each to write an hour, a fictional hour in the life of a person's life. We gave them 24 photographs based on a building. We got 24 stories, each coalition about the same character in Esther Bones. And then we made 24 objects to then go with these 24 hours, and then kind of recreated a non-linear story. Well, it wasn't quite linear in the end, but it was supposed to be a non-linear story. And that was extraordinary because you were collaborating in the abstract with these 24 different people, as well as this extraordinary house that started the whole thing rolling. And we came out with this installation which was very coherent, and we were in. Yes.
Fantastic.
Just a small story.
Any more questions?
Why is it that museums, we haven't talked about museums, why is that so complicated for architects and the failure rate is so high? And yeah.
Stand up.
We've collaborated with Tate quite a lot. I think without failure, I would hope to say. We brought in Sarah Finelli to do the Tate timeline, which is when she's an illustrator, and that was a continuous collaboration with her, with Jane Burton. And then we would have to, she would draw giant Cy Twombly's because it's her favourite artist, and then the Tate would say, you can't make Cy Twombly that big, he's not that important, he's this important. And you have this, and then someone would come and say, well, what about my aunt? Because she was an artist, why is she not on the timeline? And then Nick Sirota would say, why is it red? It should be blue. And then we have to persuade Nick that it shouldn't be blue, it should be red. And, it goes on. I think lots of institutions have so many frameworks. I think Tate is particularly good, it's really lean. I think working the V&A is changing at the moment as well. But I think they come with a huge amount of baggage and a huge amount of limitations and very specific perceptions. What's very interesting is seeing the Alexander McQueen at the V&A, because it's completely transformed those god-awful galleries, which we've seen the same so many times, because the V&A has a very specific brief for those spaces, which means whoever the designer and artist working in those spaces, you can't challenge it architecturally.
You mentioned Paris. I think that the Vuitton example, it's only a problem with ego. I think ego of two egos, I think, there in my mind. I think it's that Paris did not need another Guggenheim, another Bilbao in Paris, and I think that it's a statement from, I think, particularly from the architect and also from the one who commissioned the client. And I think that for me the best museum and the best exhibition places are the ones who are quiet on the
humble.
The Beiler and the piano in Basel. I think that is the projects that are not strong statements. I think it's a bit perverse that today the architect wants to make a statement because they want to have their name there, and I don't know. It's a bit of and if he doesn't have the name, then nobody sees him, and so it's a bit of a.
I'm wondering if we've got the poisonous mix of politics and architecture there as well, because often, museums are commissioned by politicians who want to leave a massive legacy or monument to their own ego. So that can be a problem.
It can go very.
Sorry?
Pleasing industry.
Pleasing industry. Yeah, this is maybe the very powerful.
Well, it's the ego industry more than the plea. It's not. I don't think the over flamboyant museum is about pleasing. It's about statements of
Ego.
well, it's about monuments. If
Monument,
anything,
yes,
it's
exactly.
about
Yeah,
creating
they're
these,
monuments.
these
At the same
oversized
time,
monuments.
at the same time, I don't think that every museum should be for all sorts of artists. You know, I was 2 days ago I was talking with Cindy Sherman about it, and she was telling me about a museum that it was very bad for the light for photographies, and yes, it's like if you have natural light, you know, it's not good for, you know, it may be good for Ronnie Horn, but not good for photographer.
But
So sometimes, you know, I think that one has to make some sort of compromises. Ideally, you want to do things that are for everyone. Yes, in an ideal situation, or at least, you know, you want to have options. You want to do things that, you know, that can go in many different directions. But at some point, you have to make. And at the same time, I believe that I think that context is important. I think that a gallery in Somerset, it should not be the same as a gallery in Argentina. Or I think that you should care about context. I think that we should, because the architecture, and I think that it's important, the light, the culture, the geography. So it's a mix of things.
Mm-hmm. Can we have another question from the audience? Is anyone feeling? Oh, yeah, go on.
I can do a question. I was just wondering, all three of you started without your careers not necessarily in a specific discipline, or you started in one and then changed. Do you think there's a moment where maybe at undergraduate level that discipline should be disbanded in some kind of way in creative subjects?
I teach the Royal College of Art. If I had my way, I would remove all the walls and have a huge shed and stop building overly stylised architecture, which is absolutely not future-proofed, and create, you know, a tent and put a load of people inside it and get them to communicate. I have no doubt that is, for me, is the way art education should go. I think all these boundaries and these disciplines just breed politics, and it creates, you know, the problems that we then see on in museums later. You know, to have curators and artists and architects in one space but not talking to each other, it's completely, you know, contrary to purpose.
Very bad things started to happen during the 90s in education in creative fields, and it is called Bologna Accord. It is where cultural ministers of Europe started to unify the education system through bureaucracy, and they started to do some sort of measurement system of the quality of education, and it started with a process called mobility. You could be an exchange student, and then there came transparency. We had to translate the course descriptions into English. And then the third part is now quality control. And it's unbelievable to see how this works, because you get tons of people from ministries doing the checkups, and all of a sudden the school institution is full of administrators to deal with administrators, and they start to move in people with the theory education but not art education. And they started to stand on top of you because they are defending the system, and all of a sudden there is nothing left of creative space which used to be.
And no one's teaching. Everyone is doing administration, and there's no, you know, the 8 most powerful people in the Royal College never see a student. I mean, it's completely crazy.
It's unbelievable how this is going. Unbelievable. And I think, you know, I'm just waiting for the eruption. It has to be, you know, fought against. And why don't students stand up? I don't believe this. They're not doing it.
I think this is a problem that actually infiltrates all different fields, and I think it's also to do with the scale of organisation, that when organisations become large enough, people can start silo thinking, they call it, you know, where you just operate in your little sphere and you don't interact, and often it's driven by accountants. You have to justify your costs, so you don't collaborate because that's a shared cost, and who's going to pay for that?
And also, when you ask the serious questions, why are we doing this? And they always said, the final answer is because we need the money. You don't get the funds unless doing this. It's unbelievable.
It's the whole infrastructure which is now placed with them.
In other words, like we sometimes say, form follows finance.
The bean counters are taking over. Can we have another question? Gentlemen.
Maybe just following on that conversation, do you think there's still a role for specialists? I mean, I'm a graduate from the Royal College. I love the idea of the great big open space with everyone mixing up. But I got hooked on ceramics as a schoolboy, and I've done it for 40 years. And if you look at 20th century, the great iconic piece of design, the Wegener furniture, for example, that's coming out of somebody who spent their whole life dedicated to one thing. Is there still a role for that?
Of course. No.
Absolutely, incredibly
Absolutely.
important. You know, craft is absolutely imperative.
Yeah, but you need some kind of a people with a big picture, also to be able to detect the specialist. We need specialists here. Specialists have tendencies to have a small community, and there may be 3 or 4 in the world who are as good in speciality, certain specialities as you, and it's difficult to sort of sometimes to find them. We desperately need them, but they should not be in control of the big picture. They can't.
But for me, I think your specialist should be contaminating someone else's specialism rather than keeping them clinically and separated.
Don't you think that comes out of the way that education is going these days, in as far as children and students are being too protected and they're not being necessarily, and I am a teacher, encouraged to think for themselves all the time.
Completely.
And that whilst they're told, oh, you know, experiment with this and experiment with that, but there are so many areas of their school life which is, oh, it's very, you know, it's got to be done in a particular way. We might be liable for this, we might be liable for that. There's too much, there's not enough responsibility going back to them where they can think for themselves and they're prepared to step out and think, actually, I can do this too, and I want to show everyone.
Is that not the obsession with GCSEs and this thing that we need to know? Everyone has to pass these particular exams which are written in such a particular way, which only really relate to a very particular mindset, and they don't teach us to think. They teach us to pass exams. I have my daughter going for it at the moment. It's crazy. It's these specific questions, specific answers, but it doesn't broaden their knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I
teach young ones.
You teach it.
But
Well,
that's why it's a concern, because you know what we're trying to do with them when they're younger. You're giving them that opportunity quite often. You're giving them the springboard, and then gradually the springboard loses its balance.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I too have a child going through GCSEs at the moment, and it's terrible to see how constricting that is, and it's not about teaching them to think, as you say, but it's all to do with what's measurable.
Yes.
Which I
Well,
think
which is what you
is
go
very
back to,
limited.
I absolutely agree. It's bloody quality control and endless surveys. Do you like this? Do you like this?
Beth, did you want to ask a question, or were you just stretching?
Thank you. I know a little about Iceland. Visited a couple of times, and I suppose I'm going back to the craft that you talked about. There are some amazing crafts that are almost not found anywhere else. And I guess I was going to ask you, do these translate through the rest of Europe? I mean, do the skills that you have in Iceland?
Can you name some examples of this craftsmanship?
Sorry?
You're saying that we have some skills or crafts that you don't find somewhere else.
I was thinking of the knives that are made. There's
Yes.
some extraordinary knives made in Iceland.
That's true. There's maybe, but though there's maybe within a handful people who are making knives, but they are really good, especially one of them. So in other words, you see, it has to do with also someone has a speciality, but this is crafts, and you would find that everywhere in the world. Honestly, it's not tied to Iceland, but it is so also in recent times so valuable when you see good craftsmanship. I totally respect it, totally, and no matter what you are doing. Since we got into the cyber world, this is a disappearing thing, and it is so interesting also to realize from students in art schools is that they don't know, they've not touched the real thing, and now all of a sudden courses are full in letterpress printing. can you actually cut and paste? You know, they don't know that the language, the visual language in the toolbox is a replica from a world that was. And they're like, you know, coming again into the world of the reality and start to smell, interested in paper, interested in the smell of the ink. And you know, to see freshly...
The touch of the texture of the paper.
Yes. Smell a print just out of the letterpress printing. Oh.
Wonderful, solvent abuse. Gentleman over there.
It's really aimed at Ada. So I'm very intrigued by your use of contamination as you brought it up many times over the course of the last hour, and it's an interesting use of the word because I mean obviously it's differentiating it from the pure, but normally it's used in a very negative sense, and there are other words to describe the blending of things to create impure but enhanced products like blending, like alloys. Why contamination?
I think, well, one it's a linguistic thing, I suppose. I think in Latin it has a much more, it's used in a broader sense. But also I think it applies an element of aggression where blending is about equal, whereas contaminating for me is about adding something to an existing situation which is from a different world, and so it starts to transform through an injection of something else, and hopefully that can spread in a positive way, very much in the same way that we were talking about the bar being a cancer to this very kind of ordered interior, and suddenly this slightly crazy explosion happens. I think blended doesn't really say the same way. Corrupting is another potential, and the transformation through corruption or contamination.
Excellent. Okay. Would anyone else like to ask a question?
Oh yeah, I had one. It was when you were talking about knives, and it reminded me of a designer and architect, a craftsman called Tapio Verkler, who made knives, and everything he did because it was about human touch. You know, when you made a knife, when you made a blade, when you made a building that was going to contain people, and it just went across all disciplines, and I think he was incredibly creative. I don't know whether you've ever come across it.
Exactly.
Finish design.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also just imagine the building of the samurai sword to fold it endlessly and it's unbelievable.
But those same qualities of line
yes.
and tactileness.
Yes. Yeah. And people who understand nature and has the nature.
And understand humans,
yes,
which
exactly.
I think is what is so important.
Yeah. People put too many labels on things.
Yeah. This is the magic. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to draw it to a close now, and I'd just like to thank our speakers, Abe Rogers, Lewis Laplace, and Godda, I'm not going to say his full name, for such a stimulating discussion, and also thank all of you for your contributions. And lastly, I'd really like to thank Alice, Lucy, the rest of the Hauser and Wirth team, and also I'd love to thank Ivan and Manuela for bringing Hauser and Wirth to Somerset, because as a Somerset resident it is such a wonderful resource to have, so we're all really enjoying it. Yeah. So thank you very much.